Hey guys, Derek here again with some more of my Game Boy or Game Boy collection. So these are going to be all my Game Boy Advance games, and much like the other ones, I'll just show my consoles first. So this was my first Game Boy Advance. I had the ice blue, just kind of like big, big Game Boy Advance. I actually really like this one better than the SP, and yeah, it's just so awesome looking, especially at the time, like seeing like the graphics of this thing compared to like the Game Boy Color and then especially the Game Boy. I was just like such a huge leap forward. So it was really cool getting into it. And then this was my Game Boy Advance SP. And I also got like a Japanese Game Boy Advance SP2, but it's the same color as this one. All right. So jumping into the games, you've got Blackthorn. This is like a side-scrolling platformer shooter type game. It's actually pretty cool. You don't hear too many people talking about it, and it's a Blizzard game, which is, I guess, kind of an oddity, but cool game. Uh, I guess relatively uncommon, but like I said, cool game. Then we've got the Blender Bros. So the Game Boy Advance is probably one of my favorite consoles to collect for, just because like the variety of games is so large. This is like a platforming game where like the characters that you play as has all kinds of like abilities that their ears, I guess, kind of perform. But it's a cool game. This was on Metal Jesus Rocks and Reggie's Hidden Gems video. So if you follow them, then we've got the two Bakty games. These were developed by Hideo Kojima, and they have sensors on the actual carts themselves um, that detect sunlight, and like you have to play out in the sun sometimes to recharge some of the energy bars and stuff that you use in the game. And it's I guess it's kind of an interesting thing. I wonder how long those will last over the years and stuff. But anyways, like just because it's a Hideo Kojima game, I think these games will be pretty collectible in the future. But outside of collectability, they're fun games in and of themselves. So two of them on the Game Boy Advance, cool games. We've got Capcom Classics mini mix. So there's the Capcom Classics collections on the PS2, PSP, and Xbox. I want to say original Xbox. Those ones have all kinds of games on them, but this Classics mini mix only has three games, and that's Bionic Commando, Strider, and Mighty Final Fight. I'd say if you can find it cheap, it's worth it for Mighty Final Fight. Otherwise, I would just get the disc-based collections. But I was trying to get all of the Capcom Classics collections, so I just went for this one. And then we've got the Castlevania games for the Game Boy Advance. So there's three games in total. I've got Circle of the Moon, like standalone, and then Aria of Dissonance and or Harmony of Dissonance and Aria of Sorrow came in a double pack. These games also like released on their own, but I'm trying to do better with space these days. So when I buy games, I try to go for double packs. So I went with the double packs for these. So the Game Boy Advance Castlevania games, I think, and the DS games, I think are the best Castlevania games in the series because they kept the side-scrolling action and just graphically the games look awesome, and then gameplay wise they're really good. The 3D Castlevania games are kind of hit and miss, more miss than hit, and yeah, I think these were probably the height of the Castlevania series. All right, next game up is a game I already talked about, Dinotopia. This game graphically it looks pretty good, but Lady Sia I think is a lot better than this game. But still, if you can find this game for cheap, I'd say pick it up and play it because it's pretty cool. All right, this is another double pack. We've got Dragon Ball Z: The Legacy of Goku 1 and 2. There's also another double pack that comes with Boo's Fury, and I forget the other game, like Dragon Ball GT Transmission or something like that. But these are like Dragon Ball Z adventure games, like kind of like the DS had Dragon Ball Z Origins, I think it was the Origins games. Um, this game is kind of like that. So it's basically reliving the Dragon Ball Z storyline, but just as an adventure game. So I like the Dragon Ball Z adventure games more so than the fighting games, just because it's more story arc driven, and then you can use your powers like you kind of figured you would, and fighting games are just kind of boring, especially playing single player. All right, and then we've got Drill Dozer. A lot of people will say like you need to get this game. It's a Game Freak developed game. I'm pretty positive it's Game Freak, but like it's an interesting interesting game. Like the drill, you have to like shift it up and down gears and stuff to get through certain like barriers and stuff in your way, and then like increases your attack and stuff. So it's an interesting game. It's a platforming game, and it's I guess like an action game, but I think this will probably be like one of the staples of the Game Boy Advance as far as the collecting world is concerned. We have Dynasty Warriors Advance. This game is a Muzuo type game, like I guess like Hyrule Warriors is probably the most famous one at this point. But like where you have a character that's taking on just like a bunch of enemies and stuff. This game actually looks really cool on the Game Boy, and then gameplay wise, it plays really well too. Um, so yeah, pretty cool game. And then we have Final Fight 1 for the Game Boy Advance. So this is a Final Fight game. I don't like if you've played Final Fight, it's a side-scrolling beat 'em up. I think all of them basically play about the same, but it's cool to have one for Game Boy Advance. We have Gradius Galaxies. This is probably one of the better shooters on the Game Boy Advance, and Gradius games I guess are pretty hardcore, so I wouldn't suggest this as a beginner game. For people looking to just get into shmups, I think, especially on the handheld, like I would say, play something on the Super Nintendo or the Sega Genesis or some of the 32-bit and I guess like 6th, 7th gen consoles. They're a lot more fun, but like if you just really want some Gradius action, then Gradius Galaxies is really cool. And we have Advanced Guardian Heroes, Guardian Heroes Advance, but another kind of a side-scrolling beat 'em up game, and graphically this one is a very good looking game. And like the Game Boy Advance had a lot of these I guess like up ports or like just like better looking sequels than their counterparts. So definitely grab these games if you're a Game Boy Advance collector. And then Gunstar Superheroes. This is another one where, come on, another one where the Game Boy Advance game looks really good, and side-scrolling beat 'em up, super sexy game, super sexy fun time. So then we have two more shooters. One is Rhydian 3D. I think this was actually a launch title for the Game Boy Advance, and then there's Rhydian 2, which is probably the best shooter on the Game Boy Advance. So Rhydian 3D was kind of like an Afterburner type game, like you like Afterburner, Space Harrier. There's a couple other games kind of like it, where like your viewpoint is like directly behind the ship, and you're like shooting at things going into the screen and stuff. I thought it was a pretty cool game. Like it like graphically it looks pretty cool. Like gameplay wise, the perspective of the ship doesn't get in your way much, but this game had pretty bad reviews. And anyways, in Iridian 2, they tried to fix that by just making a vertical shooter, but it's kind of like an isometric vertical shooter, in that like the screen, instead of just like being straight up and down like that, or like facing into the screen like Iridian 3D, it's kind of like tilted upwards. So you're like flying it up a slope or something like that, if I explain that any kind of way. But this game is actually really fun. Like I said, it's probably the best shooter on the Game Boy Advance, and the music is really good in this game. All right, we have Jazz Jackrabbit. I do believe this will be, oh wow, a fairly collectible game in the future, just because I don't think there's too many of them out there. Probably like Bucky O'Hare on the NES. This was Cliff Bleszinski's first game, I believe, the guy who went on to do like Gears of War. This game also released on the PC, and there's a second game and then like a Christmas special for it. But it's pretty interesting. I guess it's basically like a Bucky O'Hare ripoff of like on Game Boy Advance. So if you can find this game, give it a go. And then we've got the two Klonoa games. So there's two console Klonoa games, and then there's two handheld Klonoa games. I guess like gameplay wise, these would play basically like the console versions do, except these are just straight side scrolling. Like they're not 3D platformers like the other games are. And like colors in these games are really good. Graphics are pretty good. I guess the gameplay is kind of slow compared to the console games, which would be my only knock. But definitely pick these games up if you're into platforming games and if you like the Klonoa series. All right. Then we've got my favorite RFX interactive game, Lady Sia. I just love everything about this game. I love the graphics in it. I love the music in it. I love the setting. Gameplay is really fun. Side-scrolling platformer. I talk about it in my Game Boy Advance Hidden Gems video. So if you want to see a video of it, you can see it there. Or you can just search YouTube for a video of it. I'm sure you will find a ton of it. And then the last ones I'll show for this first video I actually wanted to show earlier, but then I realized I didn't show them, or I didn't take them out of the shelf and put them in my stack. But I've got the Final Fantasy games for the Game Boy Advance. So I've got Final Fantasy 1 and 2. And then Final Fantasy 4. And Final Fantasy 5. And then Final Fantasy 6. And a lot of people think the Game Boy games are probably the definitive versions of all of these ports. But I will leave that to you to decide. But all of these games, well, at one point used to be fairly easy to get on the Game Boy Advance for a good price. I think Game Boy collecting's kind of caught on these days. But anyways, guys, that's part 1 of my Game Boy Advance collection. And I guess I'll do part 2 now.